This week on Young Leaders Radio, I sit down with Ryan Deering, a close friend and first-year law student at the University of Illinois. Ryan has spent many years interning for many different politicians. He has worked for 3 United States House of Representative members, 1 United States Senator, 1 Missouri State Senator, and 1 Missouri House member. Ryan's political interests are labor unions, income inequality, poverty, criminal justice reform, and international relations. In this episode, Ryan will dive deep into the importance of labor unions in the years to come. Ryan and I grew up together. We're actually just high school friends, but nonetheless, still a very close friend. Ryan, welcome to the show. Please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Tony, for having me on. I really appreciate it. I wouldn't say we just went to high school together. We grew up together. I would say that, brothers for life.
Brothers for life.
That said, I'm going to law school right now at Illinois College of Law. Very lucky and blessed to have that opportunity. I went to the University of Illinois Springfield and studied political science and communications, and I received a concentration in diplomacy. And at the same time, I was able to have a number of internships due to Springfield being the state capital. It's very convenient for political science majors and even a wide range of majors, honestly. So, I've had a lot of positive experiences. I worked on a political campaign this past summer, and I'm very lucky for that opportunity as well. And I'm really just excited to be on tonight. Thanks for inviting me, Tony.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the big things that I'm excited about with your interview is you are exactly what my audience is. You're a 23-year-old man going into politics and have a passion for it. And that's something that I want people to see. I want people to have that understanding of what being in politics can look like at our age, and to not be afraid to have conversations about politics. And I'd love to hear more about your internships. If you want to kind of give a run through of the different people that you've worked for, or just a couple of them, maybe some highlights, just to kind of give some of the listeners an idea of what they can do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess my first internship was my sophomore year of college. I was lucky enough to be accepted into United States Senator Durbin's office in his Springfield office as an intern. And, I primarily worked on, constituent work, but the great thing about Springfield is that, his state director and his whole staff is based there. So I really got to make a relationship with his staff members. And I was very lucky and very blessed to have that opportunity. A lot of those people I consider my friends now, and I still stay in contact with them. And then on top of that, I've interned with a couple congressional offices in St. Louis, as well as, I've helped out on a couple state Senate races, just volunteering and interning, as well as a state rep campaign, specifically Dylan Clark and Andy Minar, just volunteering and going door to door. And then on top of that, I was lucky enough to also be a office manager / intern for Betsy Dirksen Londrigan in her primary and her field organizer for rural counties this past summer. And that was a fantastic experience. For young people like myself that want to get involved in politics, my recommendation, my advice is throw yourself into the fire. Don't be afraid and don't be timid. When you're going to be going into something like politics, there's no doubt, you're going to have anxiety sometimes going to social events or meeting people or maybe possibly getting intimidated. But understand that at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. And if your heart's in the right place, really what truly matters is looking out for other people. I think a great quote and a great understanding of what politics should be like is from Mayor Pete. He was discussing, politics at its best brings out the best in people. It's all about, representing the interests of others. And I think right now in this country, there's definitely a need for that and a want for that from young people like myself. I think a lot of people like myself are possibly disengaged in the political system. And then there's also a good-sized minority of individuals like myself as well that are 23 years old or early 20s, going to undergrad or just graduated, going into some type of professional schooling that want to get more involved and they don't know how to. So my advice is to find a candidate that you're really passionate about. Go volunteer, go intern. You're going to be doing possibly unpaid work, and it might be kind of hard or, kind of a grind, but do it because it's not about you. And honestly, it's not about the candidate. It's about the interests and the policies that they support and the people that they're going to help. And that's kind of how I always approached my internships and my experiences, is that make sure that you believe in what you're doing, and make sure that when you're doing it for the right reasons.
Mm.
And so that's kind of like what I would say to individuals that are wanting to get involved in politics.
Absolutely. Now, even maybe from the standpoint of, some young people, they're doing a different major, they're wanting to go somewhere else professionally, maybe the business world, something like that. What options do they have um, outside of actually interning or working in politics? Like, is there other avenues that they can take to kind of get involved, but not have to be committed to an entire campaign?
Absolutely. I can tell you political campaigns on both sides of the aisles love financial contributions. So if you really do support a candidate, even if they're not in your district or in your state, don't be afraid to donate money. Like I said, while they might represent that district, that area, that state, they represent an interest that could be nationwide, that could impact you as well. So you shouldn't be afraid to branch out and look outside your own community and say, you know what, I like this candidate. I think we saw that a lot with certain progressive candidates nationwide. And I don't think this is a bad thing. I think a lot of candidates, from congresswomen to congressmen, to senators, they have an appeal nationwide now. From Beto to AOC, you saw, people donating money from outside of their home state, outside of their district that they were running in. And I think that's a good thing. These people weren't giving thousands of dollars. They were giving, low dollar donations. But it's a good way to take part in the political system. And like you said, some people just don't have the time to intern. They don't have the time to volunteer. They don't have the time to pick up the phone and make a couple phone calls for their candidate. Well, then, donating money is a great way. And then also at the end of the day, voting.
Mm.
And that might seem kind of simple, but you'd be shocked by how important voting is. And there is no doubt the right to vote is in certain states a privilege, not a right. In the state of Missouri, it's for many people that are from minority communities, it is definitely not a right. It's definitely a privilege. The state government makes it more hard or makes it more difficult for African Americans and minorities to vote. And we're seeing that right now under the current administration as well. So that's what I would focus on if you want to get involved. Make sure that you want to donate money, and then make sure that you go out and vote on voting day.
The Postmaster General met with Senate this morning, two Senate committees, and spoke on how there will be no corruption and no mail-in ballot issues coming into the election in November. He's postponed all of his changes even to give people even more of an understanding that things are not going to change and things will be okay. Do you think the words that he spoke today actually will go well with the community? And you might not even have heard the speech. I don't know if you did. I know you're in school still, so you might not have heard it. But from someone that has contributed to Donald Trump's campaign and is continuing to contribute, does his word mean a lot to voters on the other side of the aisle?
Well, I'll tell you, I did hear a part of the speech. I didn't hear the whole thing. The only reason why I heard of it is because I believe Senator Carper from Delaware was having some issues with Zoom, and he cursed a couple times without knowing it. So it went viral, somewhat viral on like Yahoo News. So that's how I saw it. But I did listen to also what the Postmaster General had to say, especially in regards to what you're discussing. And, I think past action is a good indication of future action. And so when you look at what this postmaster is doing and what has been done by this current administration to make it more difficult to vote, I definitely question whether this will be a fair and free election for all people, no matter your color, no matter who you pray to, or where you were born and you came into the United States. It's definitely a question that we need to see. It's not just a talk the talk type of thing. You need to walk the walk. We need to see some type of action from this administration and from the leadership. So that's kind of my answer to that question. I question whether it will occur. He says it will, and we'll find out, I guess. And that sounds dangerous, no doubt. But that's why it's so important for us as a people to pay attention to our leaders. And that's why it's so important that we have a good leadership in place, especially coming 2020.
Do you think that there's going to be any idea going through people's minds of, well, I guess I'm just going to go to the polling station and vote in person because they don't trust the idea of mail-in voting now?
Oh, 100%. I think there is definitely, I hate to say these terms, but fake news or alternative facts out there where mail-in ballots are, cause more fraud. You start to see these stories on Facebook from, posted by other family members or by friends, and you just shake your head because, the facts are over the past 250 million mail-in ballots that have been mailed, only 143 have been actually convicted of fraud. So I think that's 0.0000006%. I mean, it's ridiculous. The facts show that it's as safe as regular voting. And, I do think that you're correct. I think people are going to be scared to vote on through the mail. And so they're going to do in person and possibly, putting their lives in danger due to COVID. But our right to vote it's sacred and it's very important. And, I think that if people don't feel safe about it, if they think that there might be some type of action from the government where their vote won't count, then I guess, do what you have to do to vote, but just make sure you are in the parameters of social distancing and wearing a mask and everything like that.
Yeah. Well, and I think the current administration does a very good job at pointing fingers where they don't need to be pointing fingers. And you see that a lot in news media. Now, I will not say the liberal side of the news is always accurate, but they definitely get a lot of pointed fingers at them about fake news and things like that. So one of the biggest reasons why I started this podcast is because I need people like you to talk about those things, like the mail-in voting false information that's being spread about it being corrupt, because I don't think people listen to it coming from like CNN now or New York Times, those kind of sources, because Donald Trump has told them not to, and that it's fake news.
I will say that there has been an increase in subscriptions bought by the New York Times and actually like newspaper sources, Washington Post and stuff, from people our age. It's actually increasing. It's on the increase, which gives me hope that individuals are wanting to be more informed. They don't want to go on their Twitter account and use that as their main source of information. So that's a good thing. But no doubt, I think people definitely need to have a lot of, they don't trust the current media in place a lot of times. And I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding of what the media's real purpose is. No doubt, there is biases in the news media, but the media is really supposed to be what we call the fourth estate. The idea that they are the fourth branch of government, and their purpose, not job, like their purpose, main purpose is to check the actions of government. And it's supposed to be, they're supposed to represent our interest. Because while we have the checks and balances within our government, the people are the final check and balance for the government. It's not the job of government to tell society what the values of the nation are. It's the job of society to tell the government what the values of our nation are. Right. And so it's really important that we have in place a media that our people trust. And so when you have people continually attacking media, continually attacking First Amendment rights like freedom of speech, freedom to organize, it causes the erosion of the fourth estate. And this idea that the media is supposed to be working for the people. Now, no doubt, we have the growth of global media conglomerates, which are a threat to our democracy, and also a threat to that fourth estate, where we have the accumulation of media companies being bought by these huge global corporations through vertical and horizontal integration. But it's really important that we have in place an idea where the people have a trust in the media. And when you have when you have political leaders attacking other media corporations or media companies, saying that they're continually wrong, and it's not just the facts that they're saying, it's not the stories, but their personal attacks. That's the thing that's different. They're not talking about the actual substance that they're not discussing the substance. When Trump tweets about CNN, rarely is he ever talking about the actual story that they're reporting on. He's just talking about the person that was saying it, like Don Lemon. Or a good example is Megyn Kelly. He did not have any actual value to an argument. He just said extremely rude things about Megyn Kelly that were personal attacks. And so I think when people our age see that, they need to
and that's any woman too, to that fact. Yep. Any woman that goes against his viewpoints, he calls them a nasty woman. And I find that completely just irresponsible and immature, to be
Yeah.
honest. Like, it's so frustrating for me for him to sit there and literally say nasty woman to a woman that has done nothing but try to make our country better and to kind of move in the right direction, you know?
Yep.
He might not agree with them politically, but at the end of the day, they are nowhere near what you would call a nasty woman, nor would I ever call a woman a nasty woman. So I don't understand why people are okay with that kind of rhetoric, but
No, I totally agree. I
it
totally
is
agree.
what they say.
Yeah.
I am gonna move topics here. Last night, Joe Biden had his speech at the DNC, which from both sides of the aisle, it's getting a lot of praise for being an excellent speech. For a candidate of a political party, he hasn't always got the best news kind of published about him because of his rhetoric. I think his age kind of plays a factor into that, and just he's not the best public speaker out there. But he did have this to say, and I'm going to read a little caption from it. With childcare and elder care that makes it possible for parents to go to work and for the elderly to stay in their homes with dignity, with an immigration system that powers our economy and reflects our values, with newly empowered labor unions, with equal pay for women, with rising wages you can raise a family on. Yes, we're going to do more than praise our essential workers. We're finally going to pay them. What do you take from that? What do you like? I know that's a very short subject of or sub part of his speech, but I think it just speaks so much into, especially things that you're passionate about moving forward.
No, absolutely. I listened to Joe Biden's speech this morning. I sadly couldn't listen to it live last night, but I listened to it this morning, and I was very impressed by it, first off. I think a lot of people were, like you said. Chris Wallace on Fox News praised it, even though, Chris Wallace is definitely one of the more fair reporters on Fox.
Mm-hmm.
You saw praise from both sides of the aisle. And I think it's going to be a great jumping off point for Biden's campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it really solidified some progressives for him, even people that don't like him. Not all of them, but I think there might be a lot of people out there that were like, okay, I can get on board this train and vote for Joe, even though I might not like his policies. That said, what he was preaching about in that campaign, or in that speech, is discussing, and it's very basic, just treating people with dignity and respect. And that's really what he just talks about a lot. And, he shares a story in that speech about his father, and how his father would tell him as a young child that individuals that are working, they need to have a job that gives them dignity, and they need to be able to be paid a fair wage, and they need to be able to look their family in the eye and say that, I can provide for you. And what we're seeing right now in the United States, I think, is especially from younger people like myself, a lot of apprehension about the future of this country, about getting jobs, about the future of the economy, and whether we're going to be able to sustain this middle class or what I would call working class conscious. And moving forward into the 21st century, we're starting to see a lot of jobs move outside the United States. And so it really, in my opinion, all these issues that we're facing, from healthcare to education, they come down to income inequality. In the United States, we have a huge amount. The income inequality gap in this country is immense. It's reached a 50-year high in 2019, and under this current administration, it's not being addressed, nor are they doing anything about it. And I think Biden will possibly put in place policies that would help labor unions. When we start talking about, if you really want to stop income inequality, I think the biggest thing that we have to do is put in place powerful labor unions that represent the interests of the working class, not themselves. And, I'm not saying that Joe Biden would be the best Democratic candidate for labor unions. No, I'm not. I would agree that he's probably not. But I think he understands that we can't rebuild American economy post-COVID without labor unions. It can't be done. We have, there's so many statistics out there that show that labor unions strengthen working class jobs. A high school graduate working in a trade that is 25% unionized is paid 5% more than compared to those that don't work in a high unionized trade. And at the same time, union workers are also 54% more likely to have a pension plan, 28% more likely to receive health care, And this is all the result of being able to, come together and form an organization that represents working class interests. Right now there's a big progressive movement, I think, expanding in the United States. I think a lot of it has to do credit to Senator Bernie Sanders. He definitely, I think, ignited a light in this country that many people were looking for. They were looking for someone that could speak for them. And I think he started something that possibly will impact American politics for decades to come. And I think the most progressive thing, though, that you can support is labor unions. So when you start talking about healthcare, like Medicare for all and education for all and the Green New Deal, I understand if you support all those policies, and I agree. But at the same time, we have to ask, how are you going to get it done? Right now what we're seeing Democratic established figures being challenged by progressive candidates. A good example is Congressman William Lacey Clay. He's even himself one of the most liberal members in the House of Representatives. He supported Medicare for all. He supported the Green New Deal. That said, he took money from corporate PACs and definitely not always the most friendly ally to the progressive movement. But he was challenged by Cori Bush, a woman, a nurse from, St. Louis, participated in Ferguson, and she won. And we're seeing a lot of that going on, where we're seeing established Democrats becoming challenged by really individuals that were not ever in the political system, never ran for office before, or never were in office before. And, I think this is a new strategy that's going on with the progressive movement, where they're trying to put in place these policies, and they're trying to get people that will vote for these policies and support these policies by challenging the establishment. And I think it's a worthwhile fight. But I think if you really want to make true change in this country, you have to form a working class conscious movement. And so when you start looking at other countries in this world, I think the Nordic countries are a really good example, like Sweden and Denmark, Iceland. What you saw occur first was not a political movement. It didn't come from the top. You saw a working class conscious movement, a grassroots movement, where labor unions came together in the late 19th century, and they formed a confederation and then created a political party that represented their interests. And the people that were a part of those labor unions would vote for that political party, and the political party would put in place legislation that would support the labor union. And at the same time, it was the labor union's responsibility to put in place collective bargaining agreements, and the political side of it, the political parties, would allow for sectoral bargaining. So it really enhanced the unions. It was like it was not a give and take. It was just a relationship that they both had. And so you see that not occurring in the United States. And like I said, I think what's going on right now with the progressive movement, where they're challenging established figures, is a good thing. It will put new leadership in the Democratic Party. It's kind of like passing the torch, or a new guard in place, and I think it's good. But if you really want to make real change, if we want to have a substantial amount of people in the House and in the Senate, then we need to have the people form a movement. And I think labor unions are that possibility. You start looking at labor unions at its height in the United States, it only reached about 35%, 35% unionization nationwide, where compared to currently in Denmark, it's at 67%. And that's not even their highest mark. I mean, that's exceptionally average for them. At one point, they had 75% unionization. So what we need right now, I think, is policies in place that support labor unions, and a working class conscious movement that is unified, where it allows skilled and unskilled laborers, as well as people from different areas, different communities, different colors, to come together and be inclusive and have some type of a working class conscious voice in our government. And so that's what I would look at. And I think when you look at Bernie Sanders, he wants to increase unionization. One of his big policy things that I don't think people really knew about or discussed was that he wanted to double unionization in the United States under his first term. So he wanted to go from around 10% to over 20% unionization in 4 years. And I think that would have been I think it would make drastic differences for the working class in this country. Higher pay, better benefits, you would have saw a collective bargaining agreements probably more enforced, because that's also an issue. These agreements are agreed to, but they're not actually even enforced or not followed, and there's no enforcement agency in place. And so when we start talking about the future of American politics, I think that we need to have labor unions play more of a part.
What would you say to people that are on the other side of the aisle? Because this is very much a liberal viewpoint, and it is. Union has always been that side of the aisle. I think at one point it had a little bit more respect on both sides, but it has definitely lost a lot of its respect with laws getting passed like right to work, things like that. So what do you say to people that don't trust unions and think that unions are bad?
There's been this perspective or perception of unions for decades that they're corrupt, that they don't benefit the working class, and I would say partly a lot of those labor unions, they didn't. They worked for themselves, and they weren't focused on representing the interests of their members. They were just interested in representing the interests for themselves on the leadership side. That said, if you want higher paying jobs, if you want better benefits, unions are the way to go. I think people don't understand the labor movement in the United States, especially in the 19th century when the labor movement was really going on. People don't understand what the Knights of Labor stood for. They don't understand what the National Labor Union Party was. They don't understand these basic, labor parties that came up and basic labor unions that were being born in the United States in the late 19th century and early 19th century that would later on fizzle out, but really caused, in my opinion, the adoption of business unionism, which is this idea that labor unions should stay out of politics. And honestly, labor unions don't play a big part in politics. Yes, they offer endorsements and they give money, but in other countries, let me remind you, the labor unions have their own party. And in the United States, while there has been a alignment with more liberal viewpoints with labor unions, especially with the Democratic Party since FDR, it has not always been the case. They do go both sides. And especially like police unions or like correction officer unions, they go towards more Republicans because they support tough on crime policies. So when we start discussing labor unions, when I say that it has to come from a grassroots movement, the people have to have a movement towards each other. There has to be an understanding of we're in this together. I think, COVID-19 has highlighted a lot of issues in society. A lot of issues that have come out of the woodwork that many people have been talking for decades, but have not been that prevalent because a lot of people couldn't see them, have come out of the woodwork because of COVID, where people are struggling week to week to get paid, where they're having a hard time paying their health care, or paying their utility bills, or paying their rent. Well, it would never be a problem if they got paid a living wage. It wouldn't be a problem if they had a job that treated them with dignity and respect.
Right.
And labor unions are the way to do that. Here's also a good point that I think also isn't made. Donald Trump, his biggest thing is that he doesn't want jobs going overseas. That manufacturing jobs are leaving the United States. Well, guess what? Labor unions will be the first organizations to stand up and say, hey, those jobs can't leave. So when Donald Trump says that he wants jobs to stay in the United States, but then supports right to work, he is contradicting himself. And Republicans
supports big business.
Yeah, exactly. And says, well, you know what? I'm going to make negotiations with the corporations. No. That's not how this goes. All right. Labor unions are the way to actually support working class people. Yeah. Now, no doubt we need to make sure that unions are actually representing the working class interest. But I think that this whole perspective of how unions are corrupt and they don't represent that interest has been overblown. It's been a huge media issue, kind of similar to what we were talking in the past with all I think alternative facts, but it's been overblown. You've had stories like Jimmy Hoffa, and a lot of bad press have come out about unions. But the reality is that unions will be the only ones that will actually fight for the American working class. And like I said, if you don't want jobs to leave the United States, then you have to support unions. There is no other way around it, especially if you believe in a free market system like Donald Trump. And that's where another contradiction lays. The government should not be negotiating with the corporations on whether American jobs should stay in here if you believe in a free market system. The reality is that the labor unions, though, which are their own entity, not government, and can be present in a free market system, should be the ones that say to the corporations, no, you're not taking our jobs. You're not lowering our wages. There is no compromise. All right. You're going to stick with the agreement that is in place. And if not, we're going to court.
Right.
And I know a lot of people don't like that because it's very adversarial. But the reality is that if we're going to increase unionization, there needs to be more challenges from labor unions to the court. Now, interesting thing though is that over the years, and this is not just recent, this has been an issue throughout our history, is that the courts have never sided very friendly with labor unions. And that's why it's so important that we put in place legislators that support unions and can appoint judges that look friendly upon labor unions. A good example of this is the conspiracy laws. The conspiracy laws were first put in place in like the 19th century. Well, they're not really put in place. They were actually an English common law principle that was adopted by the United States judiciary system after the Revolution, due to the country not really knowing how it's going to rule on cases and such. So we kept the system in place, but the conspiracy laws were put in place and were practiced as a way to counter monopolies at one point. They counter big business, but instead the conspiracy laws were used to hurt unions and like take out unions like the Loco Focos, which is a small labor union in New York in like the 1840s and 1850s. A lot of these policies, like the Sherman Antitrust Act, that was first put in place to stop big business, but it was used to actually hurt unions and put in place injunctions to stop them from protesting. So, and there's been rulings very recently that have ruled against unions and have hurt unionization. So that's why it's so important that we put in place judges that are pro-union, that are pro-labor, and that understand that if you really want to have a higher quality of life in the United States, then the only way to do that, in my opinion, is you have to enhance unionization in this country.
Right. Well, and I mean, we both come from proud union families, so we understand the importance of that. I think a lot of people, especially for me, I have people in my own life, friends and colleagues that have told me that my dad makes too much money in a union. He gets paid too much. He's done it his entire life. He's been a sheet metal worker his entire life. And it's frustrating for me because without that support, I wouldn't have been able to do what I have done in this world. So it's been super beneficial for me.
When it comes down back to what actually, while I'm not a big Biden supporter, it comes back down to what Biden said. You have your job, you have the right to be treated with dignity. And I think a lot of people are starting to understand that. And I think that really resonates with a lot of Americans, especially in the working class.
Yeah.
I think over the past few minutes when I've been talking, I think a lot of people have been hearing me discuss, putting blame on other government entities like the court system and big business for ruining labor unions and for attacking them. And there's no doubt that that's played a huge part. But also a problem in this country has been the inability to actually unify a working class. And a lot of that has to play with race. When labor unions were being adopted or being created in like the 1850s and 1860s, after the Civil War, they had the opportunity to put in place policies that accepted African Americans into their unions. That would have really created a working class conscious movement. And instead they opted out to do that, and they didn't do that. And so instead what you saw was African Americans making their own labor unions, and white workers making their own labor unions, as well as immigrants making their own unions, and not making a confederation, opting out to segregate. And it didn't cause what you would call a grassroots movement. If anything, it caused what we would see now, where we see certain labor unions siding with Republicans and certain labor unions siding with Democrats. It caused a division, where this idea that, we're going to stay out of politics. And when we do, we're going to try to play it both ways. We're going to try to be bipartisan or nonpartisan at least. And that's not the way to go. And that's also a problem that I think I should have brought up also, is that, we had the inability to have unskilled and skilled laborers to come together, as well as white and black workers to come together, as well as immigrant workers to come together and form a confederation where they can say we're all in this together.
Right.
I mean, that really represents, I think, American history, where you have the consistent pushing out of African Americans in our society, and that's an issue that labor unions need to address, and that needs to be solved. And I think a lot of some of those issues have been resolved, but there's still more work to do. And so when we start talking about increasing unionization, we need to make sure that we start talking about inclusion and diversity as well, of people of all color and from all all communities.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you on those points. What do you think, not to change the subject on you a little bit here, but what do you think is one of the biggest pushing points for this November? What do you think for voters going into November? What do you think are going to be the main focuses on these two candidates?
I would say COVID-19, honestly. You can't ignore that.
Yeah.
If you were to ask me in December or January, what would be the biggest issue? Obviously not COVID-19.
Right.
But with the circumstances that we're under right now, COVID-19 definitely plays the biggest part on how the government's going to address COVID-19 and bring down, rates of COVID-19 spreading in this country. But on another issue, I think healthcare is going to be a big part. Because I think COVID-19 obviously plays a big part with healthcare, with our healthcare system, obviously, and as well, healthcare was a big issue that was focused on already before COVID, and so I think that's going to be an issue that a lot of progressives are going to be listening to Biden, because Medicare for All is definitely getting more support in this country, and I know that Biden has committed to lowering the age for allowing people to enroll into Medicare. But I know for a lot of progressives, that's not good enough. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that issue plays out by November.
Yeah.
Because, obviously Donald Trump, not a supporter of the ACA. His supporters do not like the ACA. Biden wants to build upon the ACA, as well as, like I said, lower the age for Medicare. And then you have a progressive wing in the Democratic Party that wants to, pass Medicare for All and put in place a comprehensive universal health care plan.
And ACA is Affordable Care Act for people that don't know what ACA is. No, you're perfectly fine. Just making sure everybody knows what we're talking about. And I think it's a good point that you make. And I do have another question about Medicare for All. If I can ask this, with being such a big supporter of labor unions, one of the biggest concerns that I've heard is that if Medicare for All happens, some labor unions have very good medical insurance. They don't want to lose that. Yeah. So if it comes down to a vote, how do you bring labor unions on board for Medicare for All?
Well, I think what you're going to see is labor unions are going to be pushing for a Medicare option instead of Medicare for All. And I think that's why you saw certain political candidates like Mayor Pete possibly take a position like a Medicare option instead of Medicare for All. It was one of his arguments that he made in the debate.
Yeah.
Where he was like, when you are supporting Medicare for All, you are supporting the idea that people don't have the right to choose. And of course, Warren responded back by saying, "Hey, I haven't met many people that have said they like their private health insurance." And I get that. I think both arguments are worthy. They definitely should be considered. So I think that labor unions will support a Medicare option, but no doubt, Medicare for All could hurt certain labor unions.
Yeah.
But it would be more, that would be more obvious to more people if labor unions were more prevalent in society.
Yeah.
And I think people would understand that more. And I think people would still support some type of Medicare option, like a Medicare opt-out program, which I would be in support of, instead of an opt-in where you have to opt out and you're automatically enrolled. I think many people would support that.
Yeah.
But
Kamala Harris is somebody, her and Joe Biden has kind of taken he doesn't really know where he stands on it still, at least from what I've seen out of him. He says one thing one day and then another thing the next day, and he just kind of contradicts himself. I don't think he knows where he wants to stand on the issue. And Kamala Harris has kind of called him out on that. And one of the reasons why I think that she was a great pick for his vice president spot is because of that fact. You know, she believes in Medicare for all. She supports it, but she's also adopted it and kind of changed it to where it is kind of that opt-out strategy.
And I think there's a lot of reasons why he picked Kamala, no doubt. But I think that's definitely a good. She appeals to progressives, and I think she appeals to moderates. It should be interesting whether progressives will like her after 2020. And I imagine if Joe Biden wasn't to run for a second term, she'd be the presumptive nominee for the establishment. And I would be interested to see how progressives respond to that, whether they would come out and support Kamala, or would there be a challenger, which I assume there would be anyways. But will there be a progressive challenger that would come out and challenge Kamala for that possible nominee if Biden decides not to run for a second term?
Well, and since we're on the topic of Kamala, what do you think? The conservative media has really attacked her on her pro-choice viewpoints and kind of the severity of those. She has been supported by pro-choice organizations for years. It's kind of been a backbone for her. What do you say to people that are looking at November and like we're thinking maybe they'll vote for Joe, but with Kamala now, with her pro-choice viewpoints and how strongly she stands for it, do you think that's going to have a negative impact on moderate conservatives that were thinking about jumping the line, not jumping the line now?
I think a lot of moderate conservatives don't focus on social issues as much. I think they're a little bit more pro-business than they are focusing on like social issues like abortion or gay marriage. Even though I don't think that's really an issue anymore as much due to the Supreme Court's ruling. That said, though, I think they're a little bit more pro-business. And I think under, certain, due to COVID-19, how can you be pro-business and say that the economy's going on, like everything's working okay? But to directly answer your question, I think Joe Biden's answer to that question would be, well, the vice president doesn't hold any constitutional power. I do. And I make the final say.
Yeah.
And I think that might be good enough, honestly. We have to understand, even if Biden wasn't to run for a second term, he's not said that he's not going to. And he might, you don't know. He's made comments that he might decide to opt out. And obviously that would mean the VP would be the probable or the possible nominee. But again, we don't know. And what we do know is that in 2020, if Biden wins, he will be the president of the United States and Kamala will be the vice president of the United States. And he will actually have constitutional power. And while Kamala might have his ear and might be one of his key advisors, he'll be the one that's making the decision at the end of the day.
Yeah. And Joe Biden is also a Catholic, and Catholics tend to lean pro-life. He has definitely moved more to kind of the middle ground on pro-life, pro-choice, where he is in support of taking away the Hyde Amendment, going after that, which is a point that Kamala kind of came after him about during the debates earlier this year. So I don't suspect anything to happen there either, but I just wanted to see what your viewpoint on that would be.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. I think what's interesting about Joe is that, he has supported the Hyde Amendment in the past. I believe he came out and said that he would no longer support the Hyde Amendment as president of the United States. So I think that definitely appeased a lot of fears for some people. But yeah, Kamala did come out hard on him for that, as well as a number of other Democratic candidates did. Right. And, I would say that Joe is going to have to be able to appeal to, but I say the progressive wing of the Democratic Party and then more moderates. And it's going to be a challenge. And I think it's going to present many, many issues coming, in the next few months. But after his speech last night, I think that was a really good kicking off point for his campaign.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people were really impressed with what he had to say, especially this idea that he is mentally not there, that he's suffering from dementia. That's going to be a very hard argument to make after you just listen to him talk for 25 minutes about just destroying the Trump administration and their leadership and their inability to actually lead. I think it's going to be a very hard argument to make.
Mm. And I'll leave you with this question. I think this is a good one to end on. November is still 3 months away. It's still quite a long time until our election hits. Um, right now, where we're standing, what do you think the outcome is?
I think it's
Because polls have Joe double digits ahead.
no.
But
Well,
people say, "Oh, you can't trust polls now after what happened in 2016." So, what are you thinking?
So in 2016, no doubt, polls were not the greatest. Did not have the greatest accuracy. The only state though that was not within the margin of error for a poll was Wisconsin. That was a huge outlier. But besides that, you saw Pennsylvania and Michigan. Those two key states were within the margin of error. And I think, Clinton has a lot of baggage.
Yep.
She's not Joe Biden. She does not have that same appeal as Joe Biden. I think a lot of people that don't like Biden's policies at least respect Biden, where I think a lot of people didn't have a lot of respect for Hillary. And I think a part of that has to play with sexism, as well as, just Bill Clinton and the Clinton administration and the history of Hillary Clinton. But that said, I would, after looking at Cook Political Report, which has put out their most recent polling data, I think last week, I suspect that Biden has a high chance of winning, a very high chance. I think Michigan's in the bag. That's going to be Biden's going to win that state. I'd be surprised if he lost Pennsylvania. So I think those two states right there are safe. When you start looking at the rest of the swing states like Florida and North Carolina, Arizona, and Wisconsin, you start to see, like you said, polling data that's in the double digits, especially Florida, which surprises me. After Trump's attack on the payroll tax and defunding Social Security, like trying to, take away funding for Social Security, Florida does have an older electorate. And so that might really hurt Trump in the end. And so it should be interesting to see what goes on in the next coming months. Like I said, Michigan and Pennsylvania, I imagine, are safe. But when you start looking at Arizona and then North Carolina, two states that have been some, red states, starting to pull more blue, as well as Georgia and even Texas somewhat. I don't think Texas is really in the map. I don't think it's realistic, but I think what you saw from Stacey Abrams in 2018 puts Georgia in play, maybe not in 2020, but in the future. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very interesting to see what will happen in the future for the Democratic Party if the Republican Party continues down this line of anti-immigration and consistently voting against working class issues and not supporting labor unions and not really having a healthcare plan in place and not acknowledging that climate change is real. What is the future of that party? Because it's in my opinion, it's no longer a conservative party. It's a right-wing populist party. They're just admitting that these issues they're not occurring, that they're not real, when in reality they obviously are. And you need to have a policy in place. And so I think a lot of people are starting to understand that. And it should be interesting what will happen in 2024 and 2028. You could see some big gains for Democrats in historically red states like Georgia and possibly Texas. I would say Texas a little bit later on. I think some people have kind of jumped the gun on that one. Like they're like, oh, it can flip this year.
I think Beto just made such a loud uproar in 2016 that people see it.
Well, I think, you have to also look at his opponent. Ted Cruz is not well liked in that state. I mean, John Cornyn is different. John Cornyn is not Ted Cruz. He's well liked. The Bush family likes him. John Cornyn has somewhat been able to appeal to Trump voters as well as your historically more moderate conservative voters. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that he really is going to be challenged in the Senate race, but I think Beto might have showed us some type of game plan in 2018 that could be used later on where Texas could go blue.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it has to do with, what Stacey Abrams is doing right now with trying to enhance the right to vote in Georgia is exactly what needs to go on in Texas, where, she's trying to build, I think, a foundation for a run in 2022 as governor, possibly in Georgia again. And, I firmly believe that race was stolen from her. I mean, there was voter suppression in that whole state in 2018.
And she still came in with, well, it was a very close race.
It was less than 2%, I believe.
Yeah.
And I really do think with Atlanta growing, I think she might have a very clear, not clear path, but she might have a path to the governor's mansion in Georgia.
Yeah. I could even see her more in a federal spot as well.
Yep, I agree.
Just because she's so nationally well known now. She's doing so many press things and is just known in that community. So I think she's moving in the right direction.
I agree.
Couldn't agree more with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today on Young Leaders Radio. I wish you the best of luck in law school. You're probably one of my best friends in this world. So you're a good guy. And I just wish you all the luck in everything you do. And my thing still stands. If you run for political office one day, I will quit my job and I will come work for you. So that is still on the table to this day. If I don't agree with your policies, then I probably won't do it. But from where we're sitting right now, we see pretty eye to eye. So that's a pretty good thing. So again, thank you so much.
I appreciate it, Tony. Thanks for having me on. And, like I said, you've been a great friend to me, especially in times of need. And I really appreciate everything you've done for me, man, and my family. So obviously, I have a lot to learn from you. And I just want your viewership to know, or your listeners of this podcast, that you couldn't find a better person to listen to and to listen to his podcast. So really appreciate it, man.
Ryan, I would like to thank you again for joining me here on Young Leaders Radio. I wish you all the luck in law school, and I look forward to seeing you soon. If you enjoyed listening to Young Leaders Radio, be sure to subscribe and follow Young Leaders Radio wherever you get your podcasts. Also, head over to Facebook and Instagram to see upcoming content and to learn more about how you can get involved as a young voter.